Hi everyone, welcome to episode number 34 of the Build Podcast, and today we'll be going through Lodash, which is a JavaScript utility belt. If you go to the Lodash library website, we will see that it is currently going at version 1.0.1, which was basically just a release last night. It is also a drop-in replacement for _JS, another JavaScript utility belt library. And in this website, you will also see a lot of documentation links as well as benchmarks and testing links. And more importantly, there are a lot of videos for us to get started. It also lists some of the features as well as some of the custom builds that we can create out of the entire Lodash library. And finally, it also talks a little bit about how we can get it installed with npm module and include it in our project. Right, so after the main website, let's look at the sister website, which is the documentation. This is where I keep going to refer to each of the functions in Lodash. As you can see, the functions are divided into categories. So the very first part is the arrays, and then is the collections, chaining, and then below that we have functions, objects, and finally we have utilities and methods and properties. So when do we actually use Lodash? Now, one of the MVC library, which is Backbone, has a hard dependency on underscore. So instead of underscore, if you want to use another utility belt such as Lodash, you can also use that. So I decided to go through Lodash to sort of understand the dependency of a MVC. Also, you will find that if you need to manipulate data other than DOM manipulation, this kind of library such as Lodash comes in really handy. Next, let's briefly look at the GitHub repository. This is where if you want to develop and contribute to Lodash, it has all the instructions as well as other resources. Right, so let's look at the project for today. We have a very simple project. What we are doing behind the scenes is using Lodash functions and spitting out this information. They might be from objects or JavaScript arrays, but yep, we are manipulating them and spitting them out. If you also come to the console, you will see a few things. Here I'm also kind of listing out what are the Lodash functions. Right now it is showing us 25 because I'm using a custom build. It is also showing all the jQuery functions you have. If we come to the sources, we will notice that it has a minified version with source map links at the bottom, and of course it links to the original file as well. So where did I get this inspiration about moons of Jupiter? Basically, I was a little bit into astronomy last week, and I went up to read about the moons of Jupiter. So there are like 60 over moons of Jupiter. So I'll be focusing basically on the top 8 in the sense that they are the innermost moons of Jupiter right until the 4 Galilean moons discovered by Galileo in the 17th century. So well, hopefully we can learn something about the moons of Jupiter as well as Lodash. So let's get started on that. Right, so I am right in my desktop in an empty folder called Moons of Jupiter. So let me just open this up in Sublime Text. And right here, let's just create a new file called index.html. And over here, I'll just put in very simple markup. So Jupiter's moons. And inside here, firstly, I will add in the Lodash library. Now, usually the way I like to do it is go to this website called cdn.js, and right in the search box, I will look for Lodash. Now, Lodash, as I said, the version 1.0.1 was just released. So nevertheless, I'll just take in this one and I'll just replace the previous library with the new one, which is not a release version anymore. Let's view this file in the browser first. And if everything is working fine, if you just do a Lodash or rather underscore and enter, yep, guess what? You will get the function definition for a Lodash. Great. So the very first thing I'll do is just write in the title, which is Moons of Jupiter. And as in our example that I showed you, here I will add an unordered list of all the pictures of the moon. So I'll put it as a class and then say moon-pics. I'll create a script file with a source called script.js, and let me create that file here. Now inside the script.js, I'll be working everything inside a self-invoking anonymous function. First thing that we'll be looking at are some of the array functions here. For example, compact, flatten, range, rest. These are basically manipulating data. For example, if you look at the compact function and if you pass in an array, look what it does. It basically just throws throws out values such as 0, false, and empty string, and it will just give you a very clean string. So for this, I will add in a folder of pictures which will contain the pictures of the moon of Jupiter. So let me just do that right here. And there you go. I added all the 8 moons from the inner moons to the Galilean moons of Jupiter. And now when I come back to Sublime Text, I have that folder. I will create an array of all the links to the images along with a few of invalid values. There you go. So I have a very simple array like this. So obviously things like 0, false, undefined, empty string, null, not a number are not a valid string. So if you kind of refer to this in our HTML image tag, guess what? No image will be displayed. So how can Lodash help us? So just for the ease of demo, I will do a console log of moon pics. All the arrays are seen here, but it does have things like undefined, null, and so on and so forth that are definitely not required. So I'm going to come back to a console log once again, but this time I'm going to do _.compact, and inside the brackets I'm going to pass in the array, and that will be moon pics. Console log gives us a very clean array list now. So next I will use the jQuery function .each, and then also it will pass in another function which will basically pass in the index and the value, and after this I will append it to the DOM. So over here I created an unordered list moon pics. I'm going to come back here, and with jQuery I'm going to do moon pics, and inside here I'm going to do it inside a li tag, and of course there will be image source, and this source will have the value plus the image tag, and then finally the list item. Need to add jQuery. So let me come back to index.html, and once again from cdn.js I will add in jQuery. So I need to add in the HTTP. I'm missing the dot, so save it, and there you go. We have all the pictures of the moon here. There are no invalid images because we have stripped them out with the function compact. To just make them lay out in one line, I will add in a style.css, and the style.css will have list style as none and make them all in one horizontal line. Yep, so that looks good. Next we will look into another function that is called _object. I'm gonna just paste in 2 arrays like so. So the array 1 will have moon names and the moon diameters. I'm going to combine these 2 arrays and create an object out of it. So why don't we just do a console.log. So I'm going to pass in _.object, and my first array will be moon names and the second array will be moon diameters, and each of the array has the key and the value. The key is the moon name and the value is the diameter of the moon. So it's as simple as that, how Lodash makes it very easy to kind of combine 2 arrays into one single object. So now why don't we go ahead and add this to the DOM. So to do that, I'll just create a subheading called Galilean moons, and same thing, I'll just create an unordered list of class Galilean-moons. I will just use the jQuery function each, and then I'm just going to copy the entire object that we created and then comma a function, and this time it will have a key and a value. It will also refer to the Galilean-moons that we created. Obviously it has a dot class and then dot append. Very similarly, we will have a list item plus the key plus a little colon plus the value plus space kilometers, diameters, and then I'm just going to close it. And there you go. We have a little list of the key values all coming from an object that was manipulated by the Lodash function. So that was a little bit about the array functions in Lodash. The rest of them are also pretty self-explanatory from the documentation itself. Next we will go on to collections, and here we will use something called where. Where is the where function? There you go, where function. So this will enable us to pick up some data from an object. So firstly I'm going to come back to my index.html, and this time I'm going to create a group of moons called inner moons, and similarly I'll also have an unordered list of inner-moons. Right, so after the markup is done, let's go back to the script file. This time let me copy paste another set of data, and this data will be an array containing objects. What we'll try to do is pick up only the group that has inner as the value. Now, just to note that over here I am using static data, but usually in a client and server-side application, this data will come from the database. So similarly, just to see how it's working, I'm going to do a console.log and _.where in the moon groups, comma, and here I'm going to say group is inner because that's exactly what we want. And there you go, we have 4 objects here, and guess what, they should be all from the inner. So as you can see, it is something like a plucking method that allows us to pluck out only the objects that we want. I'm going to use the .each method from the jQuery and _where. Just copy and paste the entire thing here, and then it will have a function which will have key, comma, value. And then inside it, we will also open up, add it to the DOM, which will be called class of inner moons. Add in a list item. Now in this case, it will be the value dot name, that will be the name of the moon, and then a little bit of colon plus value dot group. Plus, and maybe I'll just add in the group and then just close the list item. Looks like I have a little error, so let me just correct the function spelling. Another little spelling, and guess what, the inner moons are right here, and they are coming from the where function that we put on top of the array. Next, just for fun, we will also take a look at max and min functions, and this time we will also use another data set that I have already prepared, and this is also an array of objects which has moon and then the orbit. We will try to pick out the minimum orbit and the moon, and then the maximum orbit and the corresponding moon. So similarly, we will first do a console.log .min and then moon orbits. Here we will pick out orbit. There you go. So correctly, console.log value is 0.3 and it is referring to moon. Similarly, we can also try out a max. I'm just going to replace this with max and see what it gives. And there you go. It is giving us Callisto, which has the highest orbit of 16. Next, let's create 2 variables so that we can store them, and then we will add it to the DOM very quickly. So var min orbit equals 2. It will be min, and of course we will pass in the data moon orbits, comma function, and here we'll pass in the parameter called moon. Inside this, it will return moon dot orbit. Right, so similarly we will create the same thing for the max, and yep, there you go. Now let's go ahead and append it to the DOM. So this will be under orbital dash period dot append, and as usual we will start it with a list item. Minimum orbital period is, so we refer to min orbit dot orbit plus min orbit dot moon, and then we will go ahead and close the list item. Similarly, we will do exactly the same thing for the max. So maximum orbital period, and of course this also has to be max, and this has to be max. Sorry, once again I'm missing this little dot here, and there you go. The maximum and minimum period is written here, and we all had to just use this min and max function for us to sanitize the data and display it. Lastly, we will go into this group called objects, and we'll take a look at this interesting function called, guess what, functions. So this is a very interesting thing in the sense that if we do underscore function and then underscore, which is Lodash, it will basically give us a list of all the functions. So let's go ahead and try that. There you go. It basically tells us that Lodash has 113 functions, and these are all the names. So this is kind of a pretty neat little tool to list out all of them. So now instead of underscore, I'm going to do jQuery, which is a $sign, and it will give us something very similar like this. Lastly, among the functions of Lodash, we will learn how to use this function called template, which will give us a micro templating mechanism to render out HTML. And we'll also use template settings to see how we can use some syntax to render out the variables. Previously, what we were doing is in our script putting in HTML. Now this is not a good practice because we are not keeping our markup and our scripts separate. So using this micro templating, this will allow us to do a very clean segregation of markup and scripts. So in in order to get that started, I will create an h2 tag here and then just call it moons, also a div called moons, and inside here I will put in all my HTML inside the script tag. So let's see how that happens. So I'll create a script tag, and inside here create an ID called moon template, and it will also have a type, and usually this will be text/template. Now inside the script tag we can continue writing plain HTML, and whenever there's a logic such as for loop or if else as well as variables, we can use the templating function to escape it and render that out. So finally here we are in the script.js, and here we will need 3 kinds of variables to do that. The first kind will be the data itself, so I'll be just using moon orbits as the data. The second one we will call it as markup, and lastly we will have to compile that markup using the Lodash's function. So for markup variable, we will just use this ID to target it. So markup equals to this ID.html. So inside the compiled variable, now we will pass in the Lodash function, so which is template, and here we'll pass in the markup variable with an object which will be moons, and here we will take in the moon orbits data. And finally I will have to pass in the ID, which is moons, or what did we create? We created .class. So .class moons and then HTML, and inside here we will pass in compiled. Right, so that's about it for script.js. Let's go to index.html. So firstly, inside the script tag I will pass in an unordered list. Now inside the unordered list we will have a for loop first, so that it can iterate through the items in moon orbits. So var I equals to 0, I is less than moons dot length. So remember, moons is what we passed on here, and finally it will be I plus plus, and of course we will open up the curly braces. Now notice here, this is just the logic. We do not want to pass this on, but previously when we came back to our index.html and we kind of checked the template settings here, and inside the objects, notice that if we want to evaluate the logic, we pass in the less than or greater sign followed by the percentage. So over here I'll just put in like so and close it, and similarly I'll do exactly the same thing here and close it. Now inside here we will render out the li tags, and this is pretty cool because we can write plain HTML. And let me just close the li tags. Let's say inside the li tag I have an em tag, and we will just close the em tag. Now inside the em tag I will be referring to my data, maybe all the moons here. So before we do that, I will just create var moon equals to moons, and I'll give it an index I. Now notice here, this is once again will not be rendered as HTML, so I will once again put it across through the syntax like this. Now I can go ahead and write the variables over here. So I'll do exactly the same thing, and now I can just refer to moon.moon. But this time we want this to render out the value. So for this case we will have to put in an equal to sign here. I will need to include semicolon here. So let me just save it and come back to the browser, and after I refresh it, notice here all the moons are listed here. So finally I'll just go ahead and complete it. So moon has an orbit of, and I'll include the familiar syntax with a percentage sign, and this time it will be moon.orbit. And let me just go ahead and close it, save it, and notice here now I have the value here. Now this is definitely a much cleaner way of doing our HTML inside the script tag, because we are segregating the markup as well as the behaviors in the script file, and this is definitely not as confusing as adding in the plus signs inside the append function. Next, you might be wondering, what if I want the syntax, instead of using greater than or less than percentage, and we want to use sometimes we have curly braces which handlebars templating, client-side templating uses. The good thing about Lodash is that it allows us to do that, and last time we checked this thing called template settings. Over here it denoted the syntax that we want to use. We will go ahead and change this syntax to use another type of syntax. So firstly I'll just comment this entire thing and copy this and do exactly the same. So first let's kind of render out the HTML. So over here, notice we were using greater than or less than and then the percentage sign. But for our new syntax, what we want to use is just this curly braces and then curly brace close, and over here is the same thing and curly brace close. Now instead of having a curly brace and an equal sign, what we will do is, so let me just go ahead and take this out. I will just enclose the entire thing in two curly braces like this, and I will do the same with moon.orbit. So I'll just take out this and enclose moon.orbit in two curly braces. Finally, I'll do the same thing with this and then close it out. Alright, so looks like our syntax is done. So let's go ahead and change it in script.js. So firstly, in order to do that, let me just copy this over, underscore dot template settings equal to, and then the curly brackets, and inside here I will have three parameters just like this: escape, evaluate, and interpolate. Inside the template settings, I'll just put in the same three familiar variables, same three familiar options. So that will be escape, comma, evaluate, comma, and interpolate. I'll just copy and paste this familiar one so that I can edit it. So escape will be this, evaluate, finally interpolate. Alright, so let's just notice the syntax a little bit. So now that we have the current way of writing the syntax, let me just go ahead and put a little bit of comment to see how it will look like we use the new syntax. It will be just percentage and then the familiar minus sign, but over here it will just be the curly braces and then the percentage, and finally this will just be the curly braces with the variables inside. Okay, so that's a little bit of guidance. So now we'll go ahead and start changing the greater than and less than and percentage with all the curly braces. So first let's go ahead and change this. So it will be just the curly brace. Make sure you don't include the auto completion, and then the closing curly brace, but we will have to escape it with the backslash here and escape it with the backslash right here. Okay, so that looks good. Similarly, we will do this exactly the same thing. So backslash and start curly brace, and here I will replace the closing with backslash and closing curly brace. And lastly, it will be exactly the same as here. So backslash open curly brace, backslash open curly brace, and lastly it will be backslash close curly brace, backslash close curly brace. So over here we will just go ahead and put it as dot to say that, hey, match any character in regular expression, and of course we will have to put this afterwards so that it can render it accordingly. And now when we come back to the browser and refresh, guess what? We have the new data rendered for us using the new template settings. So as shown over here, you can either use the embedded Ruby syntax using the greater than or less than and then percentage sign, or you can use the handlebars way of doing it using the curly braces. But nevertheless, we have a clean segregation of markup and scripts. In the final part of this episode, we will go ahead and learn how to do some custom builds here. It's pretty cool. So to do that, we will have to install the npm package of Lodash. For example, as written here, we will do npm install and do a global install of Lodash, and then we can also try out some custom builds as well as some of the parameters. Right, so here I am in my terminal once again. So all you need to do is npm install -g and then Lodash. You might need to do sudo depending on your permission level. Now I have already done that, so I will not go ahead and do it. But if you do Lodash -- version, and if everything is installed properly, it will give you the current version. So let's go ahead and do some custom builds. As we can see in the documentation right here, there are some parameters. The very easy ones are just simply Lodash _, which will give you projects that are already using underscore, or Lodash mobile, Lodash more. Just for the sake of demo, we will let's just try Lodash backbone and see what happens. So just notice here, as of now, we only have the image folder and script JS, style.css, and index.html. So let's see what happens if we do Lodash and then backbone. So notice here, it will go through the closure compiler, uglify, and then it will do the hybrid and choose the file with the lowest file size. And if we come back to our text editor, we will see that two new files is been created. First one is lodash.custom.js. It will even tell you what command created that, so you know easily what it contains. So this is for the command of Lodash backbone, and it will also create custom.min.js, which we can go ahead and use in the production. As we can see in the documentation, there are many other ways of creating a build, a custom build for Lodash, but let's go ahead and use this one, which is Lodash and then include. So we will go ahead and use this, and we will include only the functions that has been created. So once again, if we come back to our text editor and refer to index.html, currently we are referring to the cdn.js file, and very soon after we create the custom build, we can actually go ahead and refer only to the locally build custom file of Lodash. So to do that, let's go ahead and build it. So this time I'll do Lodash include like this. So it will have things like compact, each, object, where, main functions, template setting, and finally template. So let's see how that creates the build file. And there you go, a new file has been created. So let's go ahead and look at it. So now if you go to Lodash custom, it will tell you, hey, you have included this build instruction, and this includes only these functions. Now this will definitely create a much smaller file. So let's go to custom.min.js, and this is the file that we want to include. So let me just go back to index.html, and instead of referring to a file in the cdn.js, I will include lodash.custom.min.js. Now when I come back to my browser and I refresh this project, everything should look exactly the same. Yep, it is looking exactly the same, but when I come back to my source here, and it is actually referring to custom.min.js. Finally, we will deal with something really cool about Lodash, and that is using source maps. Now source maps was a new feature in version 1.0.1, so let's go ahead and generate a file with the source maps. So what will happen when we do a source map is that over here it's only referring to the minified file, and we have no way of referring back to the development file, that is the unminified version. So we will include a little URL right at the end of it, which will contain the information of the development file or the non-minified file, and very nicely it will be listed here as well. So let's go ahead and see how to use that. As according to the instructions over here, all we need to do is -p or -- source -map. So I'll go ahead and use exactly the same one, and instead this time I'll do source-map. So looks like the Lodash custom build files are already made, and this time it will have the source map. So let's go ahead and check out, and notice here it will create custom.min.js, and right at the bottom of it, it will create this little comment with the source map, and here is the source map, which will basically map the production minified version back to our original development version, which is right here. And also when we go back to the browser, notice here in the sources panel, now if we refresh, we will easily have the custom.js file, the development file as well. Of course, now we can also go ahead and set breakpoints and do our debugging. Alright, so that brings us to the end of this episode on Lodash. I hope it gave us an overview about the various functions and features that Lodash has to offer, along with the custom builds, the micro templating feature, as well as finally the source maps. So do check out Lodash for your either dependency for a MVC client-side JavaScript framework like Backbone, or even a simple micro templating framework or some data manipulation. So now I'll go ahead and share other resources related to Lodash. So one of them is _JS. So Lodash is a replacement for _JS, and Lodash offers some performance enhancement. But you can also check out _JS. It has very similar functions and collections, utilities, and so on and so forth. Next, some tutorials on how we can learn Lodash. So one of them is called Say Hello to Lodash. It was in fact published very recently, just a few days ago, and it talks about the concepts behind Lodash. For example, how it can be used in other browsers such as older browsers. Next, there is an article about getting cozy with _.js. Now, even though this is not Lodash, because Lodash and underscore are so familiar and similar in the terms of functions they use, I feel this article will give a very good overview. Next are some of the video screencasts that is created by John David Dalton, the creator of Lodash. So do go through them. For example, why Lodash, some performance enhancement. And lastly, there's this video by also the creator of Lodash, and he actually goes through the concepts behind Lodash and why he did certain things inside this conference. Alright, so finally for the build link of the episode, it is the JavaScript Playground. So I have been dealing with this blog for a few days now, and it contains very good blog posts about latest web development methodologies using JavaScript. For example, the latest is a screencast with Express and Backbone.js. It's a 2-part series. So do go ahead and check this out and have more fun with JavaScript and the browser. So as usual, for all other episodes of Build-Dash podcast, you can visit the website, and you can also subscribe through the various channels such as RSS, iTunes, Vimeo, YouTube, and GitHub for the show notes. So I'll see you next week for another episode of Build Podcast. Goodbye.